Welcome to Session 1C, Gambling Addictions. As you will notice, all participants have been muted. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat icon for further assistance. I will now turn the call over to Danielle Piakowski for today's presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining this session. I know you have a lot of really great options, so I really thank you all for taking the time to be with me this morning and to learn a bit about gambling disorder. Going to start with kind of the basics to lay the groundwork for the rest of our discussion today. It seems almost like a silly question, but the first thing I always like to discuss with everybody is what exactly is gambling? Depending on who you ask, we might have different definitions about gambling and what that looks like. So best to lay the groundwork when we talk about problem gambling and identify right from the start what exactly is gambling. So the New York Council on Problem Gambling defines gambling as needing to have three key components, which is to risk or stake money or something of value. So it does not have to be money. We most commonly think of money when we're talking about gambling, but it can be any item of value on an event or a game involving any level of chance. So there needs to be some risk that's taking place in order for something to meet the definition of gambling with the hope of a desired outcome. So when we talk about gambling, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with this list of items below. This is what we most commonly think of when we talk about gambling. Things like lottery, raffles, bingo, casino games such as card games, poker, blackjack, all of that stuff, slot machines, horse betting, and of course, our new king of the jungle, which we're going to talk a lot about today, which is sports betting. So give a little background on gambling, particularly in New York State, for us to get a sense of what the landscape has looked like and where we are currently and where it seems that we're going. Really, one of the most important reasons that I wanted to speak to all of you today about gambling is that we're really starting to see that gambling is really an emerging public health issue, particularly when we're talking about our adolescents. So I want to give you a little bit of the background and some idea of where we're going and why this is such an important topic and why you're all here today to hear about this. So New York, I was very surprised when I learned this myself, that New York has more forms of legalized gambling than any other state in the United States. And as you see below, we have a long history of gambling, like many places. So starting in the 1930s was when we first legalized gambling in some form, in the form of horse racing. And pretty consistently, almost every decade since, we have legalized new forms of gambling in the state. One of the biggest changes that we have seen was in 2022, we had the rollout of more mobile sports betting and online gambling, which really has changed the game, pardon the pun, when it comes to gambling. We're going to talk a little bit about that and what a big difference that's made. So to give you an idea, how common is gambling? How much is happening, whether we're talking about adults or adolescents? How much is actually going on? So to give you a bit of an idea about that, New York State revenue from lottery sales and gaming tax has increased almost 70% over the past decade. And we can see that that coincides with the legalization and the rollout of online gambling and sports betting. Again, sports betting rolled out in New York State in January of 2022. And in in the fiscal year 2023, we saw 4.7 billion with a B dollars in gaming revenue to New York State alone. And again, we see kind of the king of the jungle here is 850 million of that revenue came specifically from sports betting. We can see there's other forms, obviously, that generated revenue, but video lottery is a little close, but sports betting is by far our most profitable form of gambling in New York State. And we see that in 22 to 23, first year alone that it was rolled out, we added 727, just over $727 million in tax revenue for the state. And we are seeing an increase in calls and contact and outreach for treatment related to problem gambling. So since the rollout of mobile betting, online gambling, sports betting, we're really seeing a big jump in the number of participants, the number of dollars being spent, and the number of folks looking to seek services or some form of treatment or support related to their gambling. And we can see here 2021, casinos were the number one gambling activity that folks were seeking assistance or support around. So gambling treatment and services are regulated in New York State by OASIS, which is the Office of Addiction Services and Supports. Gambling and problem gambling has kind of fallen under their umbrella. And one of the ways that OASIS offers assistance to folks is by having the New York State Hope Line. So this is a phone number that anyone can call 24/7 to get some support and resources about problem gambling and where they can go to get treatment for problem gambling. And we see that prior to 22, folks calling the Hope Line and looking for assistance, the majority of those folks were calling related to casino gambling. And since the rollout of online betting and sports betting, we see since that time, it has consistently from 2022 to present, the majority of folks calling the Hope Line for assistance are seeking assistance related to online gambling and to sports betting. And we are seeing a big jump in the number of folks who are reaching out for assistance. In 23, we had just over 46% increase from 2020. And in 2024, we're seeing an almost 31% increase in Hope Line calls from 2020. So a couple different types of gambling. I always like to outline this for everybody because when we talk about gambling, we're talking about so many different kinds of gambling that folks can engage in, but they really always fall into one of these two buckets. When we talk about gambling, we're talking about action gambling and escape gambling. So action gambling, which is what our things like mobile betting and sports betting fall into this action gambling bucket, is a type of gambling where there is a perceived skill that the individual feels they may have, that they are an active participant in the gambling activity. They can maybe develop a system. We look at things like odds and money lines, and we can kind of try to beat the house if we just figure out a way. So there is a real thrill-seeking component to action gambling. It is an active form of gambling. It is not passive. We are really looking at ways to beat the system, so to speak, and kind of hedge our bets so that we can come out a winner. Escape gambling, on the other hand, is very passive. There is no perceived skill involved. People might have kind of superstitions around things that might make them more lucky or unlucky, but they are aware that they're not influencing the game directly. This is the type of escape gambling is the type of gambling when we think about things like slot machines that we're kind of just passively sitting there hitting a button, waiting for our desired result to happen, but we're not really doing anything to impact the game or impact the outcome. And we see escape gambling is more common in folks who are using gambling as a means to manage some type of uncomfortable feeling or escape. They're using it more as a coping skill as opposed to folks engaged in action gambling, which again is more of that thrill-seeking behavior. So it's important that we look at the differences in the type of gambling that someone is engaging in, because it really gives us a little bit more information about what is going on for them otherwise and big picture in their life. Is this more of something that speaks to their personality and kind of a rush that they might be seeking? or a thrill they might be seeking, versus someone who is using gambling as a means of coping, um, perhaps not in a healthy way, but using it to manage uncomfortable feelings or uncomfortable stressors that might be going on for them. And when we look at types of gambling behavior, there obviously not everyone who engages in gambling is engaging in problem gambling or having negative consequences for their gambling. So we look at there's three sort of distinct buckets when we're talking about gambling behavior. The lowest risk is actually what we call at-risk gambling. So similar to how we view alcohol use at this point in time, there is no gambling behavior that we would say is of zero risk, right? If we're engaging in any form of gambling behavior, by its nature, it is an at-risk behavior. But at-risk gambling is what we would consider normal gambling or social gambling. It's not negatively impacting the person's life. They're not consumed by it. They're not experiencing negative consequences as a result of their gambling. So someone who's in this category, while needing to be mindful about their behavior and making sure that it doesn't escalate into something more, this is not someone that we're concerned with at this point in time. They're not showing signs of any type of problem gambling. Our next level on the gambling progression is problem gambling. So at this point, someone with problem gambling is beginning to experience some negative consequence. That could vary very much from person to person. It could be financial consequences. It could be consequences related to school or work performance, impact on their family or social relationships. But we're starting to see that there is some type of negative consequence that's emerging here. However, at this point, they're not fully meeting the criteria for disordered gambling. But ultimately, the end of our progression is disordered gambling. At this point, the person has lost control over the behavior. There's a real significant preoccupation with gambling, and they are meeting the full DSM criteria at this point for disordered gambling. We kind of have, I'll mention these quickly as an aside, two types of gambling behavior that don't neatly fit into any of these buckets and are kind of their own outliers, which is organized crime gambling and professional gambling. Folks are often surprised by the professional gambling, but it really is more akin to an athlete playing a sport. Folks who are professionally gambling are typically not gambling with their own money. They're sponsored by different companies or individuals, and they're doing it in a very controlled way and assessing risk in a very calculated way that someone who's recreationally gambling is not necessarily doing. So just to kind of review briefly what the DSM criteria is for disordered gambling, which is the official diagnosis. When we look at this, we see that it is a very similar criteria that we look at for substance use disorders. You'll see there's a lot of overlap. And essentially, we're seeing that what we're looking at here is folks are not able to control the behavior any longer. We're betting with increasing amounts of money. We're experiencing an increased tolerance with the gambling behavior, similar as we would see with a substance. We're restless or irritable when trying to stop or cut back on gambling. Again, kind of akin to withdrawal symptoms when we talk about substance use and substance use disorders. Unsuccessful attempts to control, stop, cut back on the behavior, very preoccupied, having regular thoughts of gambling, planning when can I gamble next, how am I going to be able to, where am I going to get the funds, gambling when feeling distressed or as a means, again, of coping with either life stressors or uncomfortable feelings that we're trying to manage. Chasing losses, returning to gambling to kind of win back what we've already lost, continuing that negative cycle, even when we recognize that we're losing and this is having a negative impact on us. Lying to family members and loved ones to hide the extent to which we're gambling or with the amount of money that we're gambling. Jeopardizing or losing significant relationships, jobs, educational, career opportunities because of gambling. And lastly, relying on others to provide money to relieve financial situations as a result of our gambling. So again, we need some of these criteria in order to officially meet the diagnosis of disordered gambling. Prior to that would be what we call problem gambling if we're experiencing some of these criteria, but not the 4 or more required to meet the full diagnosis. So today I wanted to speak to everyone here specifically about adolescence. What we've learned about problem gambling, particularly since sports betting and mobile betting has rolled out, not just in New York, but all over the country, is that adolescents are really becoming one of our fastest growing populations of individuals engaging in gambling. And obviously, that's concerning for a variety of reasons. So, we wanted to speak to everyone today, particularly about the adolescent population. What we see is that adolescents really have kind of a perfect storm of various risk factors that come together that put them at much higher risk for problem gambling and disordered gambling than with the adult population. So some of those factors kind of fall into different buckets. First, we have parental factors. And this is something we see a lot in our own treatment setting when we have adolescents coming in for behavioral health treatment, not for gambling in particular, but when we assess gambling and we see that they are engaging in gambling, one of the biggest risk factors we see over and over again is that parents are often not viewing the gambling behavior as problematic. So an adolescent tells us, I'm engaging in gambling a few times a week. That kind of raises some red flags for us. We do some more assessment and we see there's some significant risky behavior going on here. When we discuss with the families, often the parents are really not concerned. They might even be aware of the behavior. We frequently see that they've signed the adolescent up for some of these websites, sports betting in particular, where obviously you need to be a certain age to make an account. The adolescent is not old enough. It's not uncommon for us to see that the parent has knowingly and willingly set up the account for the adolescent. So part of one of the biggest factors we have here is that parents don't view the behavior necessarily as problematic. Adolescents are often, all of us are exposed to gambling behaviors often from a young age. It's something that society doesn't necessarily have a stigma around certain types of gambling in particular. And we see families are engaging in gambling behaviors around and with even young children. So things like sports betting in particular, not a lot of stigma. We kind of know, speaking to the variation in stigma, that most folks probably wouldn't take their adolescent to a casino with them or a child with the casino with them. There's some stigma around kind of casino gambling and casino games, but that doesn't necessarily exist in other forms of gambling, things like raffles, bingo, lottery, sports betting now. It's not that same level of stigma. So we're exposing our youth to this behavior from a very young age, which is normalizing the behavior and making it something that adolescents or children are not viewing as problematic to engage in. This is something my family does. I see my parents do it. I see my uncles, my siblings, my cousins do it. It's not something that they're viewing as concerning. And parents are often viewing the gambling behavior as preferable to substance use, which of course is its own concern and has its own risks. But a recent study from Oasis found that 85% of students said they feel their parents would think it was wrong if they gambled, but we're looking at 97% of parents thinking it's wrong for tobacco use and 95 thinking that it's wrong for alcohol use, according to the student's perception at least. So there's a lot of risk factors within the family itself that may make adolescents more likely to engage in the gambling behavior. The other set of factors, risk factors that we looked at, are societal factors. So there's forms of gambling that as a society we view as socially acceptable for adolescents. We have raffles in our schools. We have raffles frequently in the community. Adolescents participate in this. It's not uncommon for folks to give adolescents maybe a scratch off here and there for them to do and to participate in. So we're kind of priming that behavior already to some extent, where we're giving the message that gambling in some way is acceptable. It's not something that is kind of completely off the table, the way we look at more with tobacco use, right? As a society, we've kind of done a pretty good job of stigmatizing tobacco use, but we're not there with something like gambling. The other thing is now we have access to gambling, all of us, 24/7. So prior to online betting, it was a little bit of an effort to gamble. We were either going to make a trip to a casino, which puts, as time, as effort. We got to plan that out, or go buy lottery tickets, which, while easy to do, you got to be there. You got to actually make the purchase. But now, with the advent of online gambling and sports betting, we have gambling available to us and casinos available to us 24/7 in our pocket all the time. There's no escape from the opportunity to gamble now. There's also no advertising restrictions on gambling the way we have with many other things, such as tobacco. So I'm sure I don't have to tell all of you, you turn on a sporting event, you're bombarded with ads for all different websites, online sports betting, different celebrities, telling us about the opportunity through DraftKings and FanDuel and all these other websites. So we're regularly fed, adolescents and adults alike, regularly fed information about where we can gamble, how we can gamble, and we're being told it's okay. This is something we do. It's routinely shown, pretty nonstop throughout most sporting events, and there's zero restriction on that at this point in time. And then the other societal factor, of course, like most things with adolescents, is the peer influence. So 2014, so this is outdated. This is pre-sports betting and mobile betting. 2014 to 2015 OASIS survey of 7th to 12th graders showed that almost 40% of students reported gambling in the past year. 40%. And that's prior to us having mobile betting and the 24/7 access that we currently have. We don't have any updated data at this point from New York State in particular, since the rollout of mobile and sports betting. So it'll be very interesting to see when that comes out, what that number looks like. I can't imagine that it is not going to be a significant jump. And then, of course, like everything, we have the psychological risk factors that adolescents experience, which is that the adolescent brain is under construction. There's no getting away from it. So gambling behavior, when they're engaging in it, is even riskier for them than it is for an adult. They don't have the same ability to assess risk. They're more impulsive. They don't think as logically. We know this. We see this in lots of areas of their lives. They have comorbid conditions, same as adults, that put them at a higher level of risk. ADD, ADHD, depression, substance use. We see that folks who are dealing with these particular issues are at a greater risk of developing problem gambling if they're engaging in gambling. Adolescents may also lack healthy coping skills. It's a stressful time of life, and they're not fully developed their effective coping skills at this point. So gambling behaviors, particularly that escape gambling behavior, may seem like an appealing way to kind of manage these uncomfortable emotions and these stressors that they're dealing with. We know there is a connection with family history as well and gambling. So if the particular adolescent has a family history of gambling, that is going to put them at a higher risk as well. And then really the biggest thing is gaming. And gaming is often, we are seeing there's more and more studies coming out about this. And this is, I think, the biggest factor of why this is such an emerging public health issue, is that gaming has really become a priming behavior for gambling. So we see that games that adolescents are engaging in, things like Fortnite and Minecraft and Roblox, all of these things are very similar, literally in their design and what they look like and how the player engages with them. They're very similar in design and play, and kind of blur the line at this point between gaming and gambling. The process of intermittent reinforcement that we are seeing in gaming is the same thing we experience in gambling. And it's a very appealing type of reinforcement. So intermittent reinforcement is, we don't know when we're going to get the reward. We know that a reward is likely going to come, but we don't know when it's going to come. So we continue engaging in the behavior with the hope that the reward is now going to come. So we're seeing this intermittent reinforcement taking place in gaming. It's the entire purpose of gambling, and it makes for a really easy segue for an adolescent who's engaging in gaming, excuse me, to think, well, I could kind of be doing the same thing and maybe winning real money at the end of the day. So it makes for a really easy segue, and it normalizes, again, the behavior. There's also the availability of non-monetized traditional forms of gambling via technology now. So one of the recent articles that came out past couple of years interviewed a variety of researchers in the gambling space. And the article noted this was incredibly telling, that the author of the article, the journalist, was speaking to Derevensky, who was one of the researchers, and noted that he was in an airport and saw what he assumed to be about a 6-year-old girl gambling, well, not technically gambling because she wasn't using money, she was winning points, but she was playing a slot machine on an iPad. And she was very engaged in it, right? And we see here, she's saying she's winning. She's saying to her dad, I can't wait to play it for real. She must have been no more than 6 years old. So we're seeing kids obviously have an enormous amount of access to electronics and tablets, and we're seeing non-monetized versions of these kind of more classic traditional gambling games and casino games being available, which again is introducing the concept earlier and earlier to our youth, normalizing playing the game and the behavior, and again makes for a very easy segue, particularly for young people, to actually move it into the gambling space. And similarly, one of the biggest things we're seeing is loot boxes. So for those of you who might not be familiar, loot boxes are, again, this intermittent reinforcement that we're seeing in gaming. So it's this concept that you can buy a loot box within a game, you can use money, and you're going to purchase this loot box, and it's going to give you some type of reward to use in your game, whether that's a new character or new skills, different depending on the game. It could be anything, things that have value, not in real life, but within the game. And you can purchase these. And it's, again, this intermittent reinforcement that you don't know what's going to be in the loot box when you purchase it. It could be really good, or it could be not so great and not very helpful. So again, it's using that intermittent reinforcement. We're seeing this feature available in most common games that young folks are playing. And it does, by definition, meet the definition of gambling. A loot box meets the definition of gambling, that we're using or risking something of value, money, to purchase something. We don't know exactly what we're going to get. We have a hope of a desired outcome. And various studies are beginning to show a connection between engaging in games with gambling aspects, such as loot boxes, and transitioning into gambling behavior. There's actually a very large study done in Canada within a couple of years, and there was lots of different aspects of that study. They looked at lots of gaming behaviors, lots of gambling behaviors of young folks, and they saw that there was a lot of overlap in folks engaging in gaming, particular kinds of gaming, and then how that influenced their gambling behavior. So we're starting to see more and more of a connection there. And some countries and states have actually already begun to place some regulations on games containing loot boxes. Some countries have said this is actually gambling. This is not something that we can make accessible to people who are not of age to gamble. And just to give you a sense of prevalence and concerns, hang on, went back the wrong way. When we're talking about our young folks in particular. So again, that 2014 to 2015 survey from Oasis. So reminder, pre-sports betting, pre-mobile gambling. So this number is realistically going to be a little bit lower. Almost 40% of students reported gambling in the past year. The 2018 Canadian survey, 38,000 plus adolescents. We found that 63% had engaged in gambling within the past year. And again, pre-online gambling being as accessible as it is today. We're seeing gambling also at a younger age, like with most behaviors, makes us more likely to develop problem gambling later in life. So that is one of our biggest concerns, and why this is such a concern for our educators, our families, our treatment providers, for our society as a whole, and why we need to be concerned about this public health issue is that we know when folks start engaging in this behavior at a younger age, they are more likely to develop a gambling disorder as time goes on. And adolescent gambling has been associated with higher rates of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, substance use, and substance use disorders. And we see that it has a negative impact on school performance and relationships. Some adolescent warning signs, some things for us to pay attention to that might clue in that someone is dealing with problem gambling or disordered gambling. Unexplained absences from school, sudden drop in grades, change in personality or behavior, new and unaccountable display of money or material possessions. This is a big one that kind of tips us off that it's specifically what we're seeing is specifically related to gambling versus something else like substance use. Um, we're seeing more money available, or they're purchasing things that we're not quite sure where would they have gotten access to that. We might see that they're engaging in social gambling. Again, a lot of times they're not necessarily hiding it. This is not the stigmatized behavior that some might think it is. So we might hear adolescents openly discussing this with each other in schools, in the community, that they're engaging in the behavior. Unusual interest in sports game scores. So, really paying attention to what's going on with particular games, what are the odds on particular games. Um, Displaying interest in gambling behavior, whether it's in other forms as well. So, outside maybe of sports, things like card games, if we're seeing that, could be a red flag. And of course, borrowing or stealing money, missing personal or household items of value. If we're starting to see that, again, might be a red flag of lots of different behaviors. But if we look at the whole picture here, we can kind of see that there's some overlap, and it might clue us in that gambling in particular is of concern. And again, more warning signs. This is not particular just to adolescents. This could be for even adults that are experiencing problem gambling, just some signs that the gambling behavior has crossed the line from being normal or at risk to really having progressed to being problem gambling or disordered gambling, is when we're seeing folks gamble to as a means of coping. So they're not doing it as, I'm on vacation and there's a casino here, so I'm going to go in for a little bit, but it's an intentional behavior to escape stressors or uncomfortable feelings I'm having. I'm gambling longer or with more money than I had planned to, really showing that the loss of control over that behavior, losing time from school or work or other commitments because of our gambling, self-destructive thoughts due to problems caused by gambling. This is of particular concern. Folks with disordered gambling are one of our highest risks of suicide when we look at across substance use and other mental health issues. Really primarily from the financial ruin that can occur as a result of gambling behavior. So experiencing those self-destructive thoughts is something very important to pay attention to. That can be a huge red flag that not only is someone experiencing disordered gambling, but really could be of a meaningful suicide risk. So we want to really pay attention to that. Borrowing or stealing money to gamble or pay back gambling debts. And of course, things like personality changes as the gambling progresses, being unable to stop the behavior even after recognizing that it is problematic and it's causing issues in areas of life, and gambling with funds designated for other expenses or purposes. So taking money out of savings accounts, college accounts, retirement accounts, using money that would have been used to pay certain bills, but taking that to gamble. Any of these things are signs not only that gambling is taking place, but that we've really progressed into having a disorder of gambling. And screening tools. I wanted to touch base with everyone about this because there are a lot of really great validated screening tools that are brief, self-administered, and can really be easily integrated into lots of different settings, whether we're talking about treatment providers, pediatricians, school settings. These are very accessible tools. So these are kind of our three brief screens that are most commonly used. These are all validated: the Libet questionnaire for youth, the bags, and the SOGS RA, which is the short form for adolescents. These take a few minutes to complete. They're self-administered by the individual themselves, and are validated and work very well at showing us, is there some red flag here that gambling may be happening and we need to assess further? And then, of course, there's more robust screens that are available for us to do that, to really see if we're meeting the criteria for problem gambling or disordered gambling. And just to touch quickly on treatment before we end, there's lots of treatment available for folks who are experiencing problem gambling and adolescents experiencing problem gambling. Really, the things that we want to look at are using evidence-based treatments that research has shown us are effective in treating problem gambling in particular. So things like cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy settings. That's going to depend particularly on the individual, what might be most benefit to them, depending on what they're experiencing. So move the screen over so I can see here. Education about problem gambling and the disease process that takes place and the recovery process and what that looks like. Of course, treatment of any underlying issues that might be going on. So again, we spoke about some comorbidities that we commonly see, things like substance use or ADHD or depression and anxiety. So treatment of those comorbid conditions is very important as well. Processing grief, if that's a component, that's more common. We see more commonly with our senior population in gambling as opposed to adolescents. Significant other involvement for everybody, but of course, particularly adolescents, is very important in the treatment process. And there's Gamblers Anonymous, which is available. Great mutual aid support group to help folks, widely available online, in person, easy to access. We're also seeing some medications. Research is showing that there are some medications, particularly opiate antagonists like naltrexone, being effective in the treatment of problem gambling, which is again an accessible medication, a safe medication we've used for years and years for various other disorders, and it's great to see that it's showing some promising results in the treatment of problem gambling as well. We have looked at SSRIs. The research is a little more limited, a little more mixed. It seems that it might be more helpful in just kind of treating the comorbid mental health conditions that folks might be experiencing, as opposed to the problem gambling itself. But certainly a great option if there is a comorbid condition there. And financial counseling, again, depending if we're talking about adults or adolescents, this might look different, but for adults in particular, financial counseling is a vital component of treatment for problem gambling. I know we are short on time, so I want to make sure I touch base with you guys about a few really important options for adolescents in particular. So we have voluntary self-exclusion from all legal New York State gambling. This is important to be aware of for our adult population. You can very easily go online at the Gaming Commission, print out a form. You can exclude yourself from gambling in New York State for a period of 1, 3-year, 5-year, or lifetime. When you send this form in, you now cannot be, if you are found on any gambling property, such as a casino, OTB, you are certainly at risk for removal, but also at risk for being arrested and charged for trespass. And you would not be able to claim any prizes on any money that you won legally. So that includes on sporting apps. So you place a bet, you win, you're not going to be able to actually withdraw the funds if you have self-excluded from gaming in the state. So really great tool available for people who really want to take the recovery process seriously and ensure that they cannot continue the behavior. For our adolescents in particular, these are two very important components and tools that are available to us. Website tools, being able to exclude yourself from being able to access certain websites in particular, and limit the amounts of time or dollar amounts spent. You can filter it out and put limits on yourself in every way you could imagine. That's an option available for parents if they do want to give them some access, which I wouldn't recommend, but if that's something that's important to them, they can at least put lots of limits in place. And then there is content blocking software altogether that you could put on the adolescent's device, which would stop them from being able to access any of these websites in particular. And really what I want to end on with all of you is a call to action, that this again is really an emerging public health issue for us to be able to kind of intervene before this progresses and gets even worse. We really need to provide education to our adolescents, to our parents, to our teachers, our community about what the risk is for adolescents, why this is such an important issue. Give them information about the warning signs and how to intervene, that there's resources available. And like with most conditions, we know that the earlier we intervene, the better outcome we're going to have. And parental awareness and involvement, this really kind of recounts what we've already discussed. Parents being aware, monitoring accounts, monitoring for gambling behavior, talking to their kids about the risks, and paying close attention for the warning signs. Here are some resources available to everybody if you'd like to get more information about the treatments available, where help is available. There's New York State OASIS, New York Council on Problem Gambling. We specifically have the Long Island Problem Gambling Resource Center. Again, the Hope Line through OASIS, open 24/7. You can contact at any point to get support and get connected to care. Gamblers Anonymous, widely available online, in person, whatever is your preference. It's there for everybody. And the link for voluntary self-exclusion in the state. And that is it. Thank you all so much for joining. I really appreciate your time. I know you had a lot of great options. Thank you so much for being here.
We do have one question for you, Danielle.
Sure.
Have you seen an increase in gambling behaviors via the stock market in young adults?
In young adults, no, I particular have not seen that. Really, it seems that the young folks, so our adolescents and our young adults, even those, in their early to mid 20s, we're really seeing the online gambling in form of sports betting and online casinos, and really sports betting by far the bigger draw. That is really where the majority of the gambling that we're seeing is coming from.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Any last closing remarks, Danielle?
No, I don't think so. I thank you all again for your time. And if anyone has any questions or would like any more information or particular details, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to give anyone any info that might be helpful.
All right. Thank you to everyone for joining. Our next session will begin at 11:30 a.m. To find out more about upcoming sessions, please visit the event lobby for discussion topics and event speaker details. Coming up next during the 30-minute break, please visit Break, Explore Additional Resources session for helpful information available for download. Thank you again and have a great day.